Hello and welcome to this PAX panel. We are talking about world building for MMOs with the Elder Scrolls Online. I'm Seamus Byrne from Byteside.com, and I'm really excited to get to have this great chat with two of the biggest brains behind the Elder Scrolls Online. I'm talking to Rich Lambert, Creative Director from Zenimax Online Studios, and Matt Firor, Studio Director, Zenimax Online Studios. Guys, how are we doing?
Doing great.
Good. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. So it's great to be here. I think Rich was live for last year or time
2019.
No. Yeah. The last time it was in person, Rich was there live, and I was there live the year before that in 2018. So this is PAX Australia is a thing for us. We love the community down there, and so we loved talking with them and coming to PAX. It's great.
Yeah, look, it is. I think last year we all kind of knew, okay, it's touch and go. It's very sad that we can't quite do it in person this year. But it does mean, I know me, at least as one person, I've at least had a bit more time to spend in Elder Scrolls Online. So it means, we've got all of the, excitement of what's been going on this year and, of course, the whole history to explore. But I thought as a starting point, I just kind of wanted to throw the idea of, what's that delicious core of world building for each of you, whether story, NPCs, or geography, like whatever it might be. What's that first layer that you feel like everything else builds on? I'll throw it to you, Rich.
For me, I think the key is figuring out the story. What is the story you want to tell? What is the feeling you want to evoke in the world? And then everything kind of plays off of that. A lot of times when Matt and I are talking about, where to go next or what to do next, oftentimes it boils down to one word, right, Matt?
Yeah, that's right. It's like each of our annual chapters or expansions in ESO can kind of be boiled down to one word just to get the vibe. So like Greymoor, which was vampires in Skyrim, was Gothic was the word, and Elsewhere, which had a dragon invasion of Elsewhere, was dragons, and Somerset was high fantasy. Technically two words, but I'll take it. And right, so I think that just that one image that you get in your head when you say a word like that, that's what we want to get across to players. So it's good. And when I do the world building stuff, Rich started out in ESO as the story guy. I mean, he was the head of content throughout the game's development. So my job was kind of one step up from that, which is like, what is the world? Like, when is it? Who is it? And that's what I have always loved doing. Kind of what are the rules of this virtual world, and what can you do? What can't you do? Who likes who and who hates who? And then use that as a framework for the storytellers and the world builders to go in from there.
Awesome. So what do you then feel like, I guess, makes the most epic memories playing an MMO? I've played a bunch over the past decade, but that thing that always kind of sticks in your mind. I'd love your thoughts on what you feel like creates those epic memories, and then how I guess that it informs your approach to building these worlds.
For me, it's other people. It's a shared experience doing something awesome. And I mean, I've been playing these games and making them since they were being made and being played. And I can remember each game very clearly and cool moments from each one, whether it's sitting down for 25 minutes in EverQuest just to regen my spell points, while a friend of mine was protecting me from roaming wolves, right? There's that. And it's just every game has moments like that are like where you bond with people because you're doing something super cool in a fantasy virtual world.
Yeah, same thing for me. It's the people, it's those moments. For me, online games have a really special place. I met my wife playing EverQuest, and we've been married 19 years now. So, just that place to kind of go and hang out and chat with other people that are just really enjoying the world and really wrapped up in the lore and being able to accomplish ridiculously difficult things as a group. Like, that is what really sets this genre apart from any other game genre out there.
Yeah. And look, let's dig in a bit about, the specifics of creating an MMO in this sort of existing world that is Tamriel. Now, there are obviously sort of interesting kind of ways you've made those choices about, creating it in the past and creating this sort of distance so you can tell its own stories separate from the other stories people know from the single player games. But, what are the limits of that 800-year buffer that you have from the other games in the series? I expect you can do a lot, but you can't drop a meteor on Tamriel or something. So, is it a question you ask yourselves, or do you just kind of follow the fun?
We ask ourselves that question all the time. How far can we push it, right? What can we do next? How do we innovate, I guess is the word we're looking for. And you're right, we have a lot of freedom. We're, in that second area in the interregnum where there's not a lot of documented lore. And Matt and Todd Howard chose that specifically so we could go in and have that room to kind of really explore and tell stories and whatnot. But there is a limit. There are, sacred cows, so to speak, that you just can't tell. Like the Dwemer is a good example of that. You just can't ever say what happened to them. It's a mystery forever, and so we poke at those all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting when we were setting up the game, and this is 2007. When I actually, with Rich was already on the Bethesda team when they hired me to make ESO, and then Todd and I sat with Todd's team for a few months trying to just set up the basics. And this was kind of the big one. It was, when is the game? Elder Scrolls lore is insanely large, but we hit on this time because, as Rich said, there's no lore, but it was also kind of close enough that the races were the same and the towns and provinces were the same, but it gave us, and the geography of course was the same, but it gave us enough time that we could tell our own stories in that framework. So when people came into the game, they knew that there would be Khajiit and Argonians and Orsimer and and Bosmer, and I'm not going to name them all, but they knew the races. We didn't have to explain that. They knew what Daggerfall was, and they knew what Windhelm is. So we didn't have to explain all that. It was just there. But 800 years is a long time. I mean, in our day, that's longer than the Black Death and, the 1300s for us. So it's a long time. So it gives us the flexibility to tell cool stories with characters that nobody knows about. But it also gives us the chance to do really cool things. Like, if you have played the other Elder Scrolls games obsessively, we put in a lot of Easter eggs and a lot of seeding of characters that are obviously the great grandparent of a character you run into in one of the other games, or there are a couple of immortal beings in Tamriel. You run into them in our time frame. You also run into them in Oblivion and Skyrim. So we have a lot of fun doing that.
Look, that's a really great point to pick up on there. That idea of seeding things into the world. Those things that fans can grab onto, and that in some ways just give it that kind of fleshed out feeling, on top of and almost sort of separate from just telling the story of the year. Can you talk a little bit more about that idea of are there people who kind of almost get given that job, or is it just something that different people just come up with a cool idea and so it gets thrown in there?
Well, we have a lore master that is kind of responsible for kind of making sure we stick to the lore and we dig into those things. But the ideas really come from everywhere, from anyone on the team. Like when we were doing Morrowind, one of the things we were talking about was, well, we're 800 to 1,000 years before Morrowind. What would it be like if we showed Vivek City still being built? That was a concept that and so then we started going, okay, tell stories. How does that work? And again, it kind of goes back to the story element that I touched on a little earlier, but those ideas come from across the team, and then we just start riffing off each other and building from there.
Yeah, the one word for our Morrowind chapter was nostalgia. So we leaned into the house that you find out exists, the sixth house, which you find out exists, spoiler alert, in the end of the game Morrowind. If you haven't gotten there in the last 20 years, then you're probably not. But we just call it the sixth house, and it's just kind of off under in a public dungeon. off in kind of a corner of the map. But people that play Morrowind know what that is, and we don't even explain it, but they know, and that's what matters.
Oh, let's talk a bit about, I guess, that kind of trick of balancing, the big picture world building with the like zone experiences that are, they feel more self-contained. From my experience, I really feel like it's a strength of Elder Scrolls Online that you can kind of dive in and, and in a couple of hours, you can have like one little nice unit of a storyline, it might feed into a larger zone storyline, but there's lots of kind of those, onion layers almost of like the storytelling and the way it all fits together, so that you can have, this nice package of an experience that then fits into, the bigger puzzle. So what do you feel like is, the trick to getting that balance right? So people maybe in the end, I guess, aren't too overwhelmed, or they don't come in and get confused because they don't know what's going on.
Oh boy. That's
the magic.
It was.
Please tell me your secrets.
Honestly, it was kind of, trial and error. We initially, when we went in there, we had a very different content model. How we were going to tell stories, what we wanted to do, and we iterated. I think when we did Stormhaven, 8-9 times, Matt, before we got to a point where we were comfortable with that.
Yeah, the Stormhaven zone was our petri dish, and there are remnants of past parts of Elder Scrolls Online littered throughout that zone if you look hard enough.
Yeah, and so we would build something, and then play through it and throw it away and say, no, we didn't like that. This didn't work. And eventually what we settled on was what you said, that the bite-sized units of content, that 45 minutes to an hour kind of time frame, that seemed like a good relative amount of time for a good play session for somebody, to get an interesting story. And so then we started going, okay, well, if we want to break these up into, 1 hour chunks, how does that work in the world? Because we knew we wanted the world to feel like Elder Scrolls, which means you can just pick a direction and go and find something to do. And so that was another layer added on top, and it just kind of iterated and iterated and iterated. And so we have what we have today.
Yeah. And it's we don't say this enough, and probably we should, but obviously we were building on the shoulders of giants because we were taking, the Elder Scrolls franchise with a very understood and very well done content model that went through all the Fallout games and all the Elder Scrolls games. And our issues that we're talking about here, we're kind of translating those awesome exploration-based, quest and questing rewards, like translating that to a multiplayer game. And that was why we kept redoing that zone a lot, because what's fun with one person is super confusing to two people, and you have to make sure that four people can play together and have fun while they do it. And those concepts weren't in the other Elder Scrolls games. So that was kind of the trying to figure out how to make that work across different group sizes, and is it fun, and what takes you from point A to point B to point C, so you find something you might not otherwise see that then loops you over to a dungeon. And and that's what the BGS stag, their dev team just has down. Like, you remember when you walk out of the Imperial sewers in the beginning of Oblivion, right? There's that one thing on your map, and it goes to the Priory to meet Martin. But to get there, you have to cross like 4 really cool, interesting things, and you want to go in and explore them. And then suddenly you're 58 miles away, and it's 45 days later, right? And that's the magic of that we're trying to capture here.
Yeah, look, I think it's a really good way to look at the way this all sort of fits together. And I mean, again, thinking about that sort of zone by zone story experience. I know, as someone who came in a few expansions in, I know I kind of had a traditional mentality of going, but like, where's the beginning? Because I want to sort of thread it all together in some kind of chronological way. But once I really did finally get pushed to get just relax and enjoy the world, then I slowly sort of worked out okay, I now want to go back and do the main story and things like that. How has that part of, as you mentioned, Rich, sort of revising the model along the way, but how have you seen that sort of community reaction, I guess, to being able to then just sort of come in, start wherever you like, or bring a new friend in and let them join in straight away. And then almost going back and treating, other parts as interesting kind of backstory or just a whole new story because it doesn't matter.
Our community loves it. And I think part of the reason why we have such an amazing community is because they understand it and grok what the game is, right? It's not about rushing to the end game and that's when the game begins. It's about their personal journey through the world, and they kind of take their time and they explore everything, and they can play with anybody as a result. Like, it's not competition, it's collaboration, so to speak, and that's what the community is all about. And so they love it. They love that they can come in and they can play something new. They don't have to feel like they have to level up or grind through, 7 years worth of content to get to the new shiny. They can just go play that new thing. And then if they want to, they can put it down, or they can go and play the previous 7 years worth of stuff. And they can bring their friends in who've never played the game before, and they can be max level and they can still make meaningful progression. It's a really different concept when you think about it. Our community loves it.
Yeah, the way you frame that question shows that you understand the issue that we're trying to solve, which is there's the story continuity side, and then there's we want everyone to have fun in the game side. And sometimes we need to actually sort through the issues with those, and that's one of them, because it's a core belief of ours that when you get the game for the first time and jump in, you should be able to play with your friends. You shouldn't be gated behind N 100 hours of content just to catch up. And those concepts just don't exist in ESO. You can just jump right to wherever you want and start playing. And the other side of that is you might do things out of order, but you can always do things out of order, right? And if you want to go do the main story, you can do it whenever you want. And that's the philosophy behind that question.
Now, again, sort of when I try to picture that idea of other experiences I've had, in this, it feels like, the hub cities and things almost, they kind of always feel like there's plenty of people around. I guess, when it's always focused on the latest thing, it's easy then for parts of the content almost feel like they're now, old. What are you doing there still? You need to catch up. Whereas my experience has been running around that you almost always bump into somebody else who might be running as the same quest line that you are at any given moment, because people are just, hanging around. And then those sort of key towns do always feel like there's people who've decided that. I mean, there's almost, then I guess part of that is throwing into like housing as a concept that means people just are hanging out wherever they've set up their favorite house. I mean, what is it about the way you've kind of put this world together that means everything does just kind of feel like, yep, there's people hanging out and it's all now, so it's okay to be anywhere you feel like being?
I'll take that at least to start, but since a lot of this was Rich's design, he can fill it in. But when we did our one Tamriel update in 2016, which actually created what you're describing, we made sure to put systems into every zone in the game, whether they were old or new, that, for example, item sets. Every zone has 2 or more item sets. And if you want that set, you have to go to that zone and find the pieces or pay for them from a trader. But and our Antiquities system that we put in Greymoor, the Thieves Guild system that we put in, the assassination system we put in Thieves Guild and Dark Brotherhood, all of those actually route people all over the world, not just to new areas. So we're doing that on purpose because we want to make sure, since the game is so massive, we want to make sure that people don't realize there's a part of the game they haven't seen yet. And so those systems are there just for that reason. But Rich can tell you how he designed that, because it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and just in addition to that, we're always adding new things as well. So like with Greymoor, we added Antiquities, which was an exploration and lore-based system that was spread out through the entirety of the game. So players that hadn't been to some of those older zones, those launch zones in a long time, were suddenly going back to those zones to do the Antiquity stuff, to collect all the goodies that were part of that system. So I think that's a big core part of it, is trying to make sure you keep it fresh and reinvigorated over time. But the other side of that, I think a lot of just making sure that players feel like they can always make that meaningful progression throughout, no matter what they're doing. You know, before one Tamriel, it was very common that you would get about halfway through a zone and then not get any more XP to do anything else in the rest of the zone because you were over leveled for it. And players either just wouldn't finish the zone or they would grind through, not getting anything useful out of it other than story. And so one Tamriel changed that, where the players are constantly making progress. And so they're essentially level scaled to the world. And the game kind of controls, you know, how hard or how easy it is based on your own personal level. And that really changed the way players played the game, because now they could go anywhere and chase down any story that interested them. They could see something on the horizon and just go towards it, knowing that they had a chance to fight there and survive there, rather than what the kind of the old school was, which is I'm going to go in this zone that's 4 zones too high for me, and I just get one shot by the first thing that sees me.
Yeah, awesome. Now I want to sort of think about side characters a little bit, because I think most people have fallen in love with Stibbins and Lady Clarissa Ront. Yeah, when you I'd love a bit of backstory on, you know, the origins of this daring duo on their misadventures. But I love how that kind of fits into world building as well. The idea that there's people out there on their, you know, they're having their own lives out here. You're not the center of everything.
The short answer is we have one of the best writing teams in gaming. Like, they are really, really, really good, and we have really good storytellers. But Rich, you can tell them about the Stibbins and.
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on something that I think is core to our process, which is every NPC we create in the world, you know, is there because they live in the world. They're a part of the world, and so we try to come up with interesting characters to fill the entire world out. And we just don't do slapstick. We do all kinds of different things. And we have, you know, gay characters and straight characters and trans characters, and they're just part of the world. Like, it's just a normal everyday thing. And, you know, Stibbins is one of those characters that has, I guess, a little bit of a challenging life, in that he, you know, is in servitude of Lady Ront. But he loves it. Like, that's his thing. Like, he absolutely adores this woman and loves working for her. So he'll do anything for her. And I think when you realize that at the core, all of the things, and we've brought Stibbins and Laurent back like 6-7 times now. And Stibbins is always in a different situation where he is doing whatever he can to, you know, fulfill whatever wacky thing Laurent wants him to do. But it's because he has this sense of loyalty to her, and that's just his characters and his mannerisms, and that's something that, you know, I think we pride ourselves on is making those interesting characters. The main characters in the stories aren't the only interesting characters. Every character is interesting.
The Merkmeyer Stibbins and Lady Laurent is my personal favorite. If you haven't done that, immediately stop watching this and run out and play that. But it's
Cold Harbor Stibbins is pretty funny too.
Yeah. Well, so is the Salas Inn in the Alakir Desert, where they're trying to hold off an Altmer invasion. The two of them is also very funny. Like, there's just amazingly good episodes of them.
See, I love that. I've done 2 out of 3 of those. So it's like, it's that nice feeling going, oh, okay, great. I'm
still more. Yep.
I mean, are there other little kind of places around the world that, you know, you have sort of, you know, personal, or brings you sort of joy at the little nugget that's been sort of dropped somewhere or has been created? And is that something that, are there things that, you know, people within the team manage to surprise you with? Because I guess the team is, I imagine it's, you know, it's a big process. You're building a big world. As much as you lead these things, you can't necessarily see every little thing that's out there. So, you know, are there things that you've been brought pleasure by discovering it along your own sort of explorations?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The one that comes first to mind is, I forget the designer's name, but he really wanted to have a pet lizard as for one of the characters. You remember this, Rich, in Sentinel, and so the creative director at the time, Paul Sage, refused to let him have a pet lizard. So he created a dog and named it Lizard. Yep. And so to this day, you go to this NPC who's just standing in Sentinel, and his dog is named Lizard, and it's never referred to. It's just you have to see it, and if you know the story behind it, it's pretty funny.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of things like that. I think some of the best moments that I have had in game are moments that don't even have words. You know, there's just a scene set up in the world. You know, a world builder gets a really good idea of, you know, putting working together with the designer to put a dog sitting right next to a grave, just staring at the grave, right? Like that's a super powerful, you know, really sad moment, but it's there and it's part of the world. You know, Matt has a really funny story about a skeleton that he loves.
Yeah, there's if you played ESO for more than 10 minutes, you'll know that our world designers and artists love to tell environmental storytelling with skeletons. So you'll come across skeletons in various stages of funny or poignant death, right? And you have to figure out how they died. And there's always a clue. And the one that I always talk about is there's one sitting under a stone wall with his back against the wall, and there's an apple on his head and an arrow through his forehead, right? So it was a game of William Tell that went very, very wrong. And that there are others that are even harder to figure out. Like there's one where there's a skeleton at the bottom of a very tall cliff, and if you go to the top of the cliff, there's the other half of the scene, and you'll see that and a note there, and you'll see that it was a murder-suicide pact, essentially, right? So they're not all fun, but they're all very poignant, and they all tell a story.
Yeah, Rich, something you touched on a little bit back that I thought it's worth picking up on is that connection between your progression systems and world building, because I think, you know, as much as we're sort of focused on the world building side, you're right that without a meaningful sense of progression for people, there's plenty of players who feel like, well, why am I just, you know, pushing through this bit of story for its own sake? So, you know, I'd love you to sort of, you know, talk a bit more about how critical you found sort of those connections to be. You know, as someone who's fairly recent to the game, yeah, I'm now a couple of 100 points into the champion point system, and then realized it's accessible across my whole kind of network of characters, and something, like it's not just even, you know, singularly meaningful. It kind of then fits into, you know, any other characters I want to play as well. So there's so many layers to that idea of it's, you know, it's about more than just levels, but with, you know, skills and champion points. So yeah, what are some of your thoughts there?
So I think the key to it all, and this is something that Matt and I spent many days at his house when we were working on when Tamriel was going to be, just kind of, I won't say arguing, but having heated discussions about what it could be and how it could work, is we settled on there has to be meaningful progression no matter what you're doing. And meaningful progression can come from any area, as long as you feel like you're progressing. So it's getting items, it's leveling up skills, it's unlocking new skills, you know, it's earning champion points, it's all of those types of things. It's collecting sky shards to get more skill points to unlock new things. And so you have to have all these different layers on there, and if one of those is missing, then players don't feel like they're progressing their character, and they get bored. And so it takes a lot of work from a lot of different teams to kind of pile all those different layers together. And I think a thing that ESO does remarkably well is all of those systems play together nicely, and they all feed into one another, where, you know, the crafting system is deeply woven into player progression. You can craft gear, and there's a whole unique set of items that you can craft in there, but you can also upgrade gear that you found in dungeons to be higher quality and whatnot. You can add enchantments to that gear through crafting. And so everything is all interconnected at all times. And so everything you find in the world has a use. And I think that's really, really important to that sense of progression throughout.
Yeah, I can't go any kind of panel or interview without saying at least once that if you ask 5 ESO players to describe the game that they play, you'll hear about 5 different games. And it's because of this. It's because there are so many systems that are interconnected. You can spin out of the questing loop and go into crafting and just craft for a year. Like, you can literally do that, especially if you're in a guild. There is no end to people asking you to do things for them, and make food and weapons and armor. But then you can just pick up Antiquities and suddenly become an archaeologist and travel around the world just to find cool things to put in your house, and that leads you to the housing system where then you're building, right? So it's all there, and it's why more and more as the game gets into housing Antiquities, these systems that are different from swinging a sword or casting a spell. We're viewing it more and more as a virtual world now instead of a game, because there's so many activities in there that you can just hang out. You can, if you just want to hang out with your friends at happy hour instead of doing it on Zoom, you can just go to your house in ESO and hang out with them in ESO if you want, right? It can do all of that and more.
Yeah, I heard someone else recently talk about the difference between just playing a game and having a hobby, and that actually that games like this sort of start to become that thing where it's just that place that you go and it makes you feel nice, and you hang out with other people, and you exactly. Personally, I love just the crafting animations when my character's standing there and it's just kind of like just tweaking away, and I'm almost like leave that background noise sometimes to just enjoy the feeling of hanging out in a crafting place.
I've made so much armor, I have that tink tink sound in my head, and it'll be there forever as I hit things with that hammer. But yeah, it's good, it's fun.
Is there, what's some of the feedback around sort of Antiquities now? It's, been in the game for a while, but it does feel like, again, one of those systems that's enabled people to explore the world again in another way. And again, perhaps even uncover little locations that they'd walk past 100 times, but never stopped at.
Yeah, I mean, exactly what you just said, right? Which is hey, I haven't been in this zone in years. Whoa, this is cool. Like, I'm finding things I didn't, know were there. And I'm learning more about, the lore of this particular culture because I'm digging up, their relics and stuff like that. So it was something that we knew was going to be successful, but I don't know that we thought it was going to be as successful as it has been, to the point now where every time we do an update, players are asking, are there more Antiquities? Are there more Antiquities every time we add a new update? So
yeah, that's a nice problem to have. Give us more. Give us more.
Indeed. Yep, indeed.
All right. Look, you love now and then throwing kind of genuine choices at players in storylines. That in that moment you kind of get that feeling. Okay, this is a binary choice, or sometimes more than one, or more than two, and that you kind of know it's going to have a bit of a lasting impact. How do you feel like that style of storytelling then feeds in the idea of, I guess, making the world feel alive and real to each player?
Yeah, it's funny. There's discussions crop up on Reddit and our forums and social media about choice in ESO all the time, and a lot of the naysayers are like, well, it really doesn't matter what you choose because the world's going to continue. The sun's going to come up the next day. There's going to be another quest, right? And I think that misses the point, because these are written more, the choice is not necessarily about the world, it's about you. Like, how do you feel about that, right? And if you're actually playing the game, not even in a role-playing sense, but just in a sense of like, I care about the story, like, you care which choice you make, whether or not you're going to go on and kill a dragon the next day, right? It doesn't matter. It's how you feel in that moment. Do you want to make the choice that is the right choice, or you want to make the choice that makes you feel good? Rarely are they the same. Right. So it's a personal thing. It's not a world-changing thing.
Yeah, and we actually kind of made that mistake at launch of having those epic world-changing, quests. And it sounds great in a single-player game, and it sounds great on paper, but in a multiplayer space, it kind of sucks because it separates players. And for the first 6 months after launch, that is all I did with my team, was fix those kind of epic separation problems where, I picked one, choice and Matt picked another, and we could never play together when we were in that area. And so, yeah, so we learned that the hard way. And so our choices are now, like Matt said, much more personal. Does this NPC live or do they die? There might be another NPC that replaces that NPC that died, but you were responsible for it. And you feel, well, you might not care, but most people feel, dirty when something like that happens. Right. And so that's what our choices are about is various shades of gray, not necessarily right and wrong, but sometimes they're right and wrong, but most of the time they're, well, which is kind of the least awful choice, and this might fit for this type of character this time, but not the next time I play through. And that's really interesting and actually really, really hard to do.
Yes. I just wanted to say, just to piggyback on that a little, the technology, required to change the world, if you think about it, you're changing the world, right? And you're going to, and if there's a choice, that means there's version A of the world and there's version B of the world. Mm-hmm. And the classic that we always use is there's a town that's under attack. And even if it's not a choice, there's a town that's under attack, you go in, it's on fire, you kill all the attacking enemies, you put out all the fires, and then it's nice and happy and there's NPCs there, right? Well, what happens the next day when your friend joins the game and wants to play with you in that town, and there's suddenly two versions of that town, the one that you just did and the one that he's in, and you can't play together. And that's just not, it's good for changing the world, but it's not good for gameplay. And that's why we backed out of a lot of those changes.
I do love stumbling across, there's always two versions of a forum post when people are asking about, which choice did you make? One is the version where, there's some people fighting over what's the correct version. And the other one where people are just, actually explaining their role-playing reasons for making the choice. And I love kind of then digging through those threads. At first, I'll be honest, I'd go and check them because I'm like, I don't want to make the wrong choice. Then I sort of just went, I'm just going to relax, going to make my choice. Then I want to go and see what other people did. And that kind of version of it, I felt like was, a fun way to just, again, that other version, I guess, of sharing that experience by digging around and seeing why other people made sort of some of those choices as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the ghost in Gideon in Blackwood, that whole quest line with the romance novel writer and then the ghost that she finds. The choice at the end of that is very interesting because both choices are good and both choices are bad. And you can look at it either way. And so we didn't presage it one way or the other. It's up to the player to figure out which version of that they want to choose.
Yeah, that one's a great example. Now, going right back to the start, I'd love, I don't know if you have a stat or it sort of vaguely, but when in the original main story, you have to choose between Sai, Lyris, or Varen at the end of that original main quest. I kind of guess that most people probably chose Varen, but do you have that kind of insight on the back end where you can see roughly? Yeah,
we do. Yeah.
It's not 90% Varen, right, Rich?
So it was, I think it was like almost 90% Varen. And it was, Lyris was the least chosen and she was at 6%. So, right. It's really neat to kind of look at those things. And we actually had this discussion when we were doing Greymoor. It was Greymoor, right? Yes.
Yeah. With Lyris. What kind of monster would sacrifice Lyris? I just want to say.
Exactly.
Really.
She's my favorite.
How do you get up in the morning?
Look, any character voiced by Jennifer Hale, I just can't help but fall in love with.
Yeah, she's pretty awesome for sure.
But look, that one I think also speaks to that issue that you've kind of raised there, which is, then of course, the characters come back. Canonically, there's been more adventures with Sai, I think, as well at a different stage, and Lyris. You mentioned replacing, sort of some NPCs here or there, but I guess a featured character like that, has its own kind of dilemmas there. So, was that one like one of the lessons for the future, or is it that idea that if now and then the kind of the rubber band snaps a little bit, that it's okay in the name of just telling cool stories?
Well, so one of the things we do is we try to, especially with our major characters, we try to never actually let the players see the character die on screen.
Hey.
So, you know, when you were sacrificing those characters in Cold Harbor, you were in Cold Harbor. You don't actually ever know if they die or not. And later on, when they, you know, when Lyris comes back or Sai comes back, you know, you can talk to them about it. And there's a little bit of, you know, exposition there that kind of ties it all together, which makes sense.
I just want to point out that you die when you start the game, right?
That is true.
Yeah,
too,
right.
Yes.
That's a good point.
So it is possible.
Yes.
Yeah, nothing like good comic book storytelling. As you say, it's like, oh, that happened off camera, therefore it didn't happen.
Indeed. You,
Or
you didn't
have
quite
to have
see
happened.
it happen. You assumed it did, but maybe you were wrong.
And that's not necessarily an Elder Scrolls Online thing. That's an Elder Scrolls thing. Like weird shit happens in the, you know, the Daedric Plains. Like it's not always obvious what's happening and who's who and what's what. And like the Darien Gautier quest lines that ended in Somerset, that was the closest we got to kind of explaining how weird the whole Daedric Prince and actually going to a plane of oblivion is, because it's not really reality and it's not really not reality. And so that explains a lot, but we didn't come up with that in ESO. That's a part of Elder Scrolls and has been for years. It just play Shivering Isles, Knights of the Nine, right?
Mhm.
You know, they go into that a little bit there as well.
So let's talk a bit about, I guess, player feedback and how that might feed into the ongoing mission of, you know, telling amazing stories. You know, are there things that you pick up on from past expansions or past moments, or the way in which sort of you pick up on feedback that means you think, oh, it might be a good time to bring this thing back because we got really positive feedback, or drop something because you're like, yeah, people didn't care for that character so much, or an area of the world, or whatever it might be?
I will say that community feedback is a large part of the reason why we are where we are today. You know, like I think at launch, especially, we launched the game, people were like, hey, we don't know what kind of game this is. And we actually had to take a step back and go, okay, what does that mean? How does that work? Oh, you're right. We kind of tried to appeal to both MMO and Elder Scrolls and didn't really hit the mark on either. So we doubled down and went Elder Scrolls. What does that mean? And started focusing on adding the guilds and the justice system and one Tamriel, and just kept going from there on. And so I think without that ability of the team to kind of take a step back and actually listen to that feedback some, I think ESO would be a very, very different game. We probably wouldn't be as successful as we are today without doing that.
Totally agreed. I mean, we have a pretty established metric at this point. We don't even think about it that much anymore, but we did a lot in 2014, 2015. And that's that when we're doing things like you say, like looking at systems that we might want to change, looking at feedback, we always look at three things. One is kind of what players are actually doing in the game, like through metrics, and then what they're saying they do in the game is the second thing, and that isn't always the same. And the third is what we think we should do in the game as developers and as players of the game. And usually, if you triangulate those three things, an obvious choice or a couple of choices pops out, and that's the one thing that we didn't use for that was one Tamriel, though, and that's why Rich said it was such a discussion, because that was something that the players didn't even know we were thinking about, really. And it was a big decision, but it was the right one. And if you look back at it, we kind of snuck it in a few places, like in PvP at the time. Everyone was kind of leveled to the same level a little bit, and Orsinium, we used that level scaling system mostly because we couldn't answer the question of who do we want to play Orsinium. Right. If you think about a traditional MMO, it's like, well, it's max level people. It's the next expansion. And we're like, we just launched on console like 2 months ago. We can't make it max level. And then it was like, well, why not just have everyone play it and level scale? And we're like, that's a great answer. And then players actually started telling us they liked Orsinium the best because they could play with their friends. Guilds could run recruiting events there and actually get in game and actually go through the public dungeons there with people that were widely disparate in level. And so that was kind of the first step towards one Tamriel.
That's great. Now, look, we've got a little bit of time left. I thought we're talking about world building, but we haven't really touched on the literal aspect of the world so much, and that's the geography, I guess. What qualities do you kind of throw to that, that side of the team when it comes to the way in which they lay these zones out, the way in which, I guess they're always going to be working on sort of something else that's a little bit down the track. But is there ever an aspect of going back as well and tweaking anything? Or is it kind of like, well, yeah, that's, that zone is that zone. And just that kind of physical space aspect to what it means to, to build Tamriel.
So I think we're always learning, right? Like, I think that's the biggest thing. We try something in a zone. If it doesn't work, we go, okay, what didn't work? Let's try to fix that in the next zone. And so it's a constant learning process for us. And I think we definitely have improved over the years. You compare the launch zones to the first couple of chapters to kind of the current chapter now, they are night and day different between, what we have now and what we used to do there. And a lot of that is that learning process. We don't generally go back and burn a zone down and rebuild it anymore. We did a lot of that before launch, and it wasn't very efficient. Yeah. So we try to make sure that when we get ready to launch something, that we're comfortable with it, and we try to take those lessons learned. I think a really good example is you compare some of the base game zones in the Eldmeri Dominion, especially when you go into like the Valenwood area, where they feel like they're tubes of content, or Cold Harbor feels like there's 3 distinct platforms with tubes, and you can't really go and explore it. You have to do that in order. And so we took that feedback from the players and from our own playthroughs, and we're like, okay, we want to make sure that players feel like they can just pick a direction and go and go from there. And we experiment with verticality in zones. Sometimes we've done better at that than others, but it's a constant learning thing for us.
Yeah, I think I said in some other panel at some point that we really consider Orsinium, the Rothgar zone, to be kind of ESO 2.0, because that was the first zone that we did from scratch after the game launched. And you can just walk in and see that it is the prototype for all of the chapter zones, because it has it all. It's got the verticality done right that Rich is talking about. It's got the quest where you can make a choice whether to push an annoying person off the cliff or not, which is definitely a requirement in zones like that. P.S. I pushed them off the cliff.
I think everybody did.
But yeah, if you go in Orsinium, you can see the 2015 version of what became the chapter system for ESO. And that's because we sat down and looked at what we did good and what we did not so good. And especially Orsinium City was the prototype for our new city. We called it City Tech, but it was really just a better layout and a better way of doing cities.
Look, I love trying to test out if I can shimmy down a cliffside or not. Sometimes it's a really bad choice, and I just keep falling. Other times you find that little path and you're like, woohoo, look at me, I got down there. Or jumping off a waterfall and then realizing that one wasn't as deep as it looked from the top, and you just think, oh yeah, that happens. That's a real world.
Yep.
Yeah, if you want an example of a zone we didn't do verticality in, and I'm having a total blank on the zone name, but it's the second one in Valenwood Ridge, after Grotwood, before Malabar.
Oh yeah,
that one, Green Shade.
Thank you. Yes,
that's the one that has the cliff that goes, from east to west across the entire thing, and it cuts the zone in half. And there's like 3 ways to go up, and they're never close to where you are, and there's no way shrines near it. So,
yep. And Craglorn's the same way, right? Now that's a different way for different reasons, but that was definitely a learning experience as well for us, right? Where we wanted to have a huge epic zone, really cool explorable pathways, but it's broken up into 3 distinct zones, and there's only one way up into each of them, and it's not very conducive to exploration.
But it looks really cool.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and that's definitely makes a lot of other things forgivable along the way. As long as it looks cool, I'll forgive a lot. As a wrapping up point, what do you feel like when someone new, they're joining the team, they're coming in, you want them to kind of familiarize or get their head around what it means to you? So, what do you encourage people to do when they're coming in to help you, build this world?
First and foremost is get familiar with the game, like play the game. I'm a huge proponent. Matt is too. We both play the game like crazy, but huge proponent of the only way the game or the piece of software that you're working on gets better is if you actually use it and you experience the same type of pain or excitement as your player base does, right? So when you run into those same pain points, you're like, okay, I understand where players are coming from. I really like this. They didn't like this. Like, it just makes it easier to have those conversations when it comes down to, well, what do we do next? Or what do we fix? Because one of the unfortunate things in game development is, well, we can do anything. We can't do everything. And we don't have unlimited time. We don't have unlimited resources. And you have to prioritize. And if you don't know the game, you can't really make a good choice in what to prioritize first.
Excellent. Look, you can whisper the answer to this one to me as a very final wrap up point. Just who's the fourth ambition? Can you just is it, are we going to find out it's something clever?
You'll find out in 4 weeks.
Yeah.
I'm very
excited.
excited.
You want to go
actually.
on PTS, you could go
Yeah,
find
you play
out
on
now.
the PTS right now.
I always forget to just jump in there. Oh no!
Yeah.
Look, I hate spoiling it for myself, because I'm like, I want to do this one exactly when when it's live and real.
You will find out.
Excellent. Look, Rich and Matt, thank you so much for your time.
It's
This
totally my pleasure. And as I say again, like, we would so love to be there in person, and I hope we can next year. It would be awesome.
Here.
Yeah, fingers crossed. But I guess until next year, and everything is crossed that we're all together next year. But yeah, again, thanks to everybody who's tuned in to watch this PAX panel. And I'm sure there's lots more cool stuff you can go and dive into after this one.